You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
What if the secret to living longer wasn't a breakthrough drug, but eating beans, walking more, and knowing your neighbors? Today we sit down with Dan Buettner, star of the Netflix series Live to 100. He's the 4 times New York Times bestselling author, 3 times Emmy winner, National Geographic explorer, and the creator of the global phenomena Blue Zones. Dan has spent decades unlocking the habits of the longest lived people on earth, and now he's helping cities, companies, and cultures redesign for longevity, proving that we can build better health by design, not just discipline. In our conversation, you'll discover the one thing every Blue Zone has in common, the simple but effective ritual for relieving stress, the everyday food that could add 4 years to your life, and the surprising health benefits of giving back. So if you're curious about where health, happiness, and human design intersect, and how to create environments where well-being becomes automatic, this is the one not to miss. This is the Dan Buettner episode. Dan Buettner, welcome to High Net Purpose.
It's a delight to be here.
When I first started this adventure into podcasting, we were looking at who would we really want on the list, and you were one of the top on it. So I'm delighted that we've managed to do this in Los Angeles. Thank you.
I'm feeling the pressure.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. So we normally ask this sort of big question of, do you have an articulation of your purpose?
Yes, it is discovering traditional wisdom and putting it to work in our lives today. And most of what I've done the last 30 years is exactly that.
Traditional wisdom into our lives today, what we sort of lost and forgotten.
Well, I think we under-index it, in an environment of AI and technology. We look to sort of these electronic solutions. And I'm more interested in, the human species has been around a long time, at least 25,000 generations. And there's a sort of natural selection that happens that favors our survival, favors our thriving. And I also posit that it favors human happiness. So paying attention to what traditional peoples, to a certain extent, our ancestors have done, but carefully, not everything, but harvesting their wisdom when it comes, well, what should we do if we want to live the longest, or what did they do? What lessons can they teach us about living a more fulfilling or happier life?
So the arc into this becoming your purpose. So when you were younger, you were an adventurer,
right? So I say when you were off doing useful and productive things with your life after graduating, I went out. I biked from Alaska to Argentina. I bicycled around the world, and I biked across Africa. And they were world records at the time. They've probably all been beaten by now. But I spent about 8 years doing that, and relied almost every night on the largesse of some African villager or some peasant in Siberia for a place to pitch my tent and water and often a fire to cook my meal. So I developed a certain affinity for really simple people around the world, and the ability to talk to them, but also an understanding that there's great wisdom here that we gloss over because how they look or how they live.
And where did that come from, that lust for adventuring to going the sort of different route to everybody else?
I had a mentor in George Plimpton, who was a writer, participatory journalist, who started the Paris Review. And immediately before doing those bike rides, I was an intern for him. And he taught me, A, to think big, and the power of sort of relentless pressure gently applied. You can get a lot done over time. So he taught me how to have a big vision, taught me how to infect others with that vision, and also a certain doggedness to get it done. Like, no, I mean, when I biked around the world, there was no path around the world except through the Soviet Union. They hadn't let an American in the Soviet Union like that since before 1917. So I was the first person to have a carte blanche visa.
How did you get it?
I befriended a Soviet explorer who and a KGB, and second guy who was into KGB who also wanted to do this trip. And I essentially made the deal, I'll find the financing to bike around the world. I'll get you in the United States. You get me into the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And it was working from within that got it done.
And then you talk about how it became a adventure with purpose then at a certain point. And I've heard you use the language that it was to solve a great mystery.
I had a very good editor at National Geographic who, he never assigned any of my legendary bike rides for the magazine. And he said, after I'd pitched the third one, Crossing Africa, which was a very difficult and I think epic journey, he said, everybody's impressed with your expeditions, but what we're really interested in at National Geographic are expeditions that add to the body of knowledge. So what does that mean? That means that you're going out in the world and bringing back something that's useful for others, not just to go and have an adventure. I think so many the quote unquote expeditions out there is usually, some person who has a dream of a personal quest, and they retroactively try to make it relevant for others and goal setting or whatever. But this editor, Peter Miller was his name, really kind of planted this idea in my head to develop a new generation of expeditions that harnessed wisdom. And the first 17 manifestations of that, I came up with a process by which an online digital audience would direct a team of experts to solve mysteries. And the mysteries were like, why did the Maya civilization collapse? Did Marco Polo go to China? Where did Western civilization get its start? So I had a full-time staff of scientists and archaeologists and writers and videographers, and then we developed a clever connection to a digital audience of over 1 million people who voted to decide where our team would go every day the expedition team would go to gather these clues, and then they would help us, the audience would help synthesize the clues that we had, so we could really harnessing the wisdom of the crowd to solve mysteries, and it was a big success.
And then that led to you starting to see, hang on, there's something else going on here in terms of longevity and ultimately the blue zones.
So we had, the way we paid for these expeditions were subscribers.
Okay.
And the only way we could make it work, at a certain point, I had a business, I had to pay salaries and an office and so forth. We did 2 expeditions a year, so we were always on the lookout for a good mystery. And the Japanese government offered us to sponsor one of these expeditions if we could find a good mystery in Japan. And we struggled for a while, but then came across a World Health Organization finding in 1999. The area of the world with the highest disability-free life expectancy in the world was Okinawa, Japan, this archipelago of, actually it's 161 islands, people don't know that, the southern tip of Japan. It was actually the Ryukyu's kingdom. But I thought, now that's a good mystery. Like, how are these people living the longest lives without disease in this incredibly obscure corner of the world? And we did an expedition in 1999, and it was fantastically successful. And that gave me basically the idea that led to Blue Zones.
Wow. And that's so over 25 years ago it began. And before we get into some of the concept around it, some of the key underpinning to some of the work that you've done, the environmental side of where people live. You seem to be quite empathetic in that you say that, quite often people are unhealthy and it's probably not their fault. And you also talk about the sort of the issue of to be healthy, you need to be wealthy. What is it in the environment of where people live that maybe they can't themselves change? And then secondly, that sort of wealth and health divide. What have you learned on that?
So America, we have 43% of people obese, not just overweight, obese, and there's a third of us are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And you say to yourself, I mean, there's a lot of finger wagging. Just at the Milk, and I saw some government officials in the Trump administration suggesting that, well, it's our patriotic duty to get healthier. Well, it's not a bad idea, but we live in this environment that makes it almost impossible to escape unhealthy calories. Our cities are full of cars. We've pretty much engineered physical activity out of our lives. And right now, the rate of obesity is about 3 times what it was in 1980. The rate of type 2 diabetes is about 6x. And you say to yourself, is that because Americans today are less patriotic, or we lack discipline, or we lack some sort of moral character to keep ourselves healthy? And to that question, I would answer a resounding no. We're just as good as our parents were in the 1980s, a generation that suffered a fraction of the rate of, chronic disease and suffering obesity. So you ask yourself, well, what has changed? Have people changed? No, but the number of fast food restaurants has gone up by a factor of about 20. The number of calories sloshing around in our daily food environment has about doubled. The food industry makes about 4,300 calories per person per day, and there's enormous incentive to get us to consume those calories. Yep. And so that's why I argue that it's really not the individuals. It's this unconscious environment, the unconscious decisions we make because of our environment is what's causing most of the sickness, not the lack of conscious will.
What about wealth, the wealth and health divide? You see that, is that just a US thing, and other parts of the world it's?
Some other parts of the world. So in the United States, if you're in the top quintile, top 20%, your life expectancy is 3 or 4 years greater than if you're in the bottom 20%. But in one of our blue zones areas, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, actually the poorest people have the highest life expectancy, or the best chance of reaching age 100. They also have the longest telomeres, which is suggestive of a lower biological age. And the reason for that is in Costa Rica, they invest in public health more so than in kind of health care, which is sick care mostly in this country. So every man, woman, and child in Costa Rica has the right to at least one visit a year from a health ambassador who has your health records, who will screen you for diabetes, screen you for cardiovascular disease, check your medicines, make sure your home is a place where you're not likely to get an infectious or chronic disease. And if there's the seeds of one of these diseases, they get you in right away, sometimes 15 years early before it shows up in an emergency room as a heart attack or as severe diabetic incidents where you have to go on dialysis or something. So what's interesting is in Costa Rica, they spend about 1/15 the amount per capita that we do in the United States on healthcare, and they have half the rate of middle-age mortality. So that it's a very good example of an entire population where wealth is negatively correlated with health. So it's something to think about.
On the data side, how hard is it to try and pull some of this stuff apart? I guess the causation, correlation, and then some people say, look, it's just genetics. How do you counter that type of argument?
Well, when it comes to longevity, it's impossible to make a causation claim, almost impossible. There's some statistical overtures where it approaches causality, but the way we approach it is this. The Danish twin study established that only between 15 and 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes. 80% is something else. What is that something else? Well, our approach was to we parsed worldwide census data to identify these 5 areas. We actually identified 10 or so, but 5 of them didn't make the cut. But we identified these 5 so-called blue zones where people are living about 10 years longer than Americans. And in some of the cases, that's actually middle-age life expectancy is 10 years. So guys our age are living 10 more years than people are doing in the rest of the industrialized world. And all these places have an average set of genes. So you can factor genes out of this. So they're doing something else that is producing this extra 10 years largely without disease, without cardiovascular disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes. So our project with National Geographic then, first of all, sought to validate these ages. It took us 3.5 years to validate the birth and the deaths in each of these blue zones. We got our first 2 grants to do that. So establishing that, yes, people are indeed this old, and then finding the common denominators, which are the correlates, by the way. We find what correlates to living a long time in these populations. But remarkably, no matter where you go in the world, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, the Seventh-day Adventists, the same things, the same set of factors are driving longevity in all 5 of these places. So you get this kind of layering of correlations that start to approach causality. But I will never make a causal association between anything I say and longevity.
So, love of food, is this something that always been there, or that's come out of your understanding of how people live in these countries? Because you've written a number of books on food, and your latest one on the one-pot meals, etc. Can you give some background to that?
So I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers, and you make an okay living on writing books. But at a certain point, I was more interested in seeing if I could manufacture a blue zone. And I started a company in 2009 that got hired essentially by insurance companies and hospitals to lower the disease load of entire cities. And I did that not by trying to change people's behavior in those cities, but by recruiting city governments and the private sector to help change the environment. We can unpack that more in a minute.
Is that Albert Lee?
Albert Lee was our first one.
Yeah.
And now we've done it in 70 cities, and the numbers grow. But at a certain point, the way we eat probably drives 50% of the formula of living longer or dying younger.
50%?
Yeah, or die. Yeah. We talk about stress. You can talk about physical activity.
Yeah.
You can talk about having a sense of purpose. You can talk about having a really good insurance plan for if you get sick. But how you eat is probably 50% of. So there was a clear pattern in the way people eat in blue zones. And just to simplify it, it's essentially a whole food plant-based diet. There are a few idiosyncrasies on the edges, but they are essentially eating peasant food, beans and grains and tubers and nuts and things that grow in the garden for the most part. They ate some meat. But I realized to engage people, the runway for changing your health behavior for most people is through their mouth. You eat 3 times a day. We love to eat. Our family gathers around food. We have entire networks on television about food. So I decided in about 2018 to go back to all the blue zones, get old women to pull out their best recipe, these recipes that have been around for about 500 years in many cases, and then to capture them in a book for National Geographic with the photography and the recipes, 100 recipes to live to 100, and it became a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I realized that this is the best way to engage people in this larger body of work. Start with food and then segue them to the other ideas. This latest book, which is coming out right now, it's called Blue Zone Kitchen One-Pot Meal. What you have in America is a population that eats out about 100 times a month. Every time you eat out, you consume about 300 more calories than you would if you ate at home. Those calories tend to be laden with ultra-processed ingredients, with sugar, and with fat. The very simple answer to get any country eating healthier is getting them eating at home, where you can control the calories, you can control the recipe, and you can cycle through enough recipes so you find the food that people love. So this latest book, the attempt was to begin with Blue Zone food guidelines. This is the diet of longevity around the world, and then get the best chefs in the world to devise recipes that can be executed quickly. You only need one pot and 20 minutes, and you have a maniacally delicious pot of food for under $2 a serving that will stack the deck in favor of you making it to 100.
Do you need a complex sort of drawer of spices and everything to go with it? Or
these are all peasant foods. You can, I mean, there's a dozen spices you should go out and get.
Yeah.
And it'll probably total investment of $60. So you stock your pantry with these dozen or so spices. And I always say that you should have beans on hand. People ask me all the time if there's a longevity supplement that they should be taking, and I say yes. You should take 100 or so black beans a day, or the beans of your choice. And it's very clear that people are eating about a cup of beans a day, have about 4 extra years of life expectancy over those people who are getting their protein from less healthy sources. So having beans on hand is important.
So I guess that's the protein question, because most of the criticism of these diets tends to be around there's not enough protein in there. Go eat some animal meat.
That's just so wrong. The average American, if you look at the CDC website, you'll see the average American gets about twice as much protein as they need. And that excess protein's hard on your kidneys, it's hard on other organs, and you mostly spend a lot of money to pee it out. And most of when people say protein in this country, they almost always mean animal protein. And consumption of animal protein is correlated with higher rates of colorectal cancer, of prostate cancer, of breast cancer. That protein package, when you're getting it from an animal source, almost always comes with saturated fat. It comes with hormones. It comes with an aggregation of the toxins that we have in our soil. For every pound of beef we eat, it takes 11 pounds of grain. So you're getting 11x the concentration of the toxins, the glyphosate and so forth, if you're eating meat. So it's much healthier and easier to get the protein you need out of plant-based sources. And that's indeed what we see in Blue Zones. So this isn't an agenda of mine.
No, I know. And so it's the beans and what else on the protein side? Well,
there's protein in every vegetable.
Yeah.
We don't realize it, but so even tubers have vegetable. Spinach has more protein cooked spinach has more protein per gram than beef does.
Yeah.
You just got to eat a lot of it.
Yeah. Okay. You've also got a vocabulary around purpose that you've identified in these zones as well. Can you talk us through what you discovered on that side?
Yeah. So all of these Blue Zones have a vocabulary for purpose. It often comes with mother's milk. They don't have this existential stress of what's my place in society or what should I be doing. There's always an expectation that they're committed to the community. They're committed to their family. In many places, there's a religion. In Okinawa, they have this word ikigai, which roughly means the reason for which I wake up in the morning. A new Blue Zone I'm working on in the South Pacific, there's a word kuleana, which is kind of a blend of purpose and altruism. So you're not just pursuing your hobby in sports car racing or your favorite sports team. There's always a dimension of it where you're doing what you love and what you're good at, but for somebody else.
Yeah. Because volunteering and stuff comes up quite a lot too, doesn't it, in some of the Blue Zones, and people helping each other out, whether it's next generation or people in their community.
If you could put the power of volunteering in a capsule, it would be a blockbuster billion-dollar drug. People who volunteer have lower BMIs, they have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, they have lower healthcare costs, they report higher levels of subjective well-being, higher levels of positive affect, around the world, by the way. It's so counterintuitive. And the best time to volunteer, by the way, is when and if you got fired from a job. It's the best anecdote for rebuilding a social network, rebuilding self-esteem, and taking the focus off of your own problems and putting them elsewhere. There's good literature around this.
Going back to the public policy side, what have you learnt about creating influence in that space?
You never want to tell people what to do. You give them options. So our Blue Zone projects, as we call them, one of our most important interventions is to help City Council choose policies that favor healthy food over junk food and junk food marketing, favor the pedestrian and the cyclist over the motorist, favor the non-smoker over the smoker. And there's often lots of business pressure to do the opposite of what's good for us. What we do is we come in with policy menus, so evidence-based policies that have worked elsewhere to get cities healthier. And then we don't require them to pick any one of these policies, but we do require them, if they want us to come in their city and work with them, the mayor and the city council has to agree to spend a few hours with us with these policy menus. And we also bring in the private sector. It's not just the public sector. And we go through each one of the policies and we evaluate it for effectiveness in their city. So it's not, I'm not going and telling them, well, this is much more effective. And feasibility in their city. Can we get it done in this city? And then invariably, we find a half a dozen or so policies float to the top that all the heads in the room are nodding yes, that this would be effective and feasible in this city. And then once we identify those policies that have a runway, then somebody on our team is charged with making sure those identified policies get discussed in city council, implemented, and when necessary enforced, but actually put to work. And that's something that is we overlook. But when it comes to the health of a population, the biggest ROI, the biggest bang for the buck is optimizing policy. Much bigger than trying to get individuals to change their behaviors. Much better than gyms or diets or longevity hacks. Public policy. And
engaging those local key people, have you found a way to what is it? Is it by showing them in Fort Worth, where you created these huge metrics around what you saved in terms of healthcare, etc.? Is there certain things that you find tend to work, change minds?
Yes. If you understand from the private sector is hiring right in the first place. So you mentioned Fort Worth. In Fort Worth, that we were there for 5 years. And in that time, Fort Worth itself identified that our project saved them about $250 million per year in projected healthcare costs for the foreseeable future, because we don't change people's minds, we change their environment, so their unconscious decisions are better. So that word gets around, so people come to us. And we have a rigorous process by which we actually audition cities. So before you're Jonesville, America, and you want your city to become a Blue Zone city, we actually will send a team there ahead of time. We'll interview the mayor, the city council, the CEOs, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the superintendent of schools, and we will essentially open our kimono and say, we are coming in this city to limit your freedom. We're here to limit your freedom to make unhealthy choice and to increase your freedoms to make healthy choice. And if they right away fold their arms and say, well, that's not for us, we move on to the next town. We don't waste their money. We don't waste our time. But it turns out there's a lot of city councils and mayors whose top agenda whose number one priority is the health and well-being of their city. And for those cities, they're willing to put their political equity behind these policies that are sometimes unpopular with local business. But when it comes to, now remember, 75% of the people living in their city, if it's in America, are suffering. They're overweight or obese, which means they're going to die young, and they're going to suffer for a long time. Average American's going to suffer 12 and a half years before they die with the disease or disability. And there are some really enlightened mayors and civic leaders who realize that's our priority. And for those leaders, Blue Zones Project is a really great investment for them.
When you say that, people suffering for 12 and a half years before they die with these diseases, etc., it seems like a no-brainer.
It should be a no-brainer, but there's often more. Business interests tend to be strong, but we also need a functioning economy, and people need to make a living to live as well. So there's often competing agendas.
Singapore. What can we learn from Singapore?
Well, Singapore is the consummate example of leadership that has taken an evidence-based approach to policy and had the courage to make unpopular decisions that favored the health of in this case, a country. It's not a very big country. It's only 5 or 6 million people. But in one lifetime, they've seen their life expectancy go up by 25 years. And currently, they're kind of tied for first with the highest health-adjusted life expectancy. So in other words, they're the country where people live the longest lives free of disability and disease. And it's not a coincidence. It's Lee Kuan Yew, the former prime minister, making unpopular decisions around taxing cigarettes. The first country to tax cigarettes and put lurid pictures of what mouth disease looks like on the package, front of the package, and put them out of the way, make them hard to get, and smoking rate plummets. Of course, in America, for example, everybody wants a car or, 2 cars. And Lee Kuan Yew saw very quickly that wasn't feasible and put a very unpopular 300% tax on cars, taxed petroleum, oil, required an extra permit above that to just buy a car and tolls to drive downtown. And as a result, a car is out of reach for almost 90% of the population. Only about 10%, 11% of Singaporeans drive. But with all the tax money that generated, making cars inconvenient and expensive, they invested in a very fast, clean, air-conditioned, safe, on-time public transportation system where nobody is more than about 200 meters from a public transportation that will get them to work much faster than their car will, much safer, much more conveniently. And as an interesting byproduct, the average Singaporean takes about 10,000 steps a day without even thinking about it, just getting back and forth to the public transportation.
4 miles a day on average.
That sounds about right, yes.
Crazy.
And that's way more physical activity than the average American gets. And, we're hounding people to go to the gym and get their steps in and these gadgets and all these sort of fairy tale strategies that we, marketers incessantly kind of sell us, but they haven't worked for 75 years. And we keep thinking that, something's going to change, but it doesn't.
So moving from the complex area of public policy to love, you wrote about having a epiphany in Ikarai around love.
Yeah, so they both of them have been divorced, and she was about 75 and he was about 85, and they fell in love. And first of all, they both got happier. Happiness and longevity go hand in hand. The happier you get, the longer you're going to live in general. But there was this kind of mutual care that you saw. People who are married live about 4 more years longer than people who are divorced or single. And it's especially advantageous to the man. Man gets a much better end of the deal. They tend to, I actually went to their house, And I saw the wife cooking and making sure the man took his medicines, and I saw the man, this true love for his wife, and hugging her and kissing her, and the stress reduction that comes from this sort of complete couple. And at the end of the day, most of the things that get us to a healthy age 100, which a 50-year-old, a really healthy 50-year-old could plausibly expect making it to 100, are the things that make the journey enjoyable.
Yeah.
And love and a good partner is I put top on that list.
Because loneliness is the other big thing, right? With obesity in the US and around the world, seems to be killing people.
Yeah, so if you're lonely, which is defined by not having at least 3 friends you can count on a bad day in your life, it shaves about 8 years off your life expectancy. And loneliness keeps climbing. I talked to the former Surgeon General of the United States, who told me that about 50% of older people report being lonely, which doesn't necessarily mean they're alone all the time. It just means they don't have quality friendships. And, knowing that little piece of information, if you were in charge of a government and really wanted to create a healthier country, we should be spending a lot more money on connecting people in a meaningful way than in developing the next, GLP-1 drug.
Yeah.
Because connecting 8 years of life expectancy, I don't know of any pill or supplement or genetic intervention that offers anywhere near 8 extra years of life expectancy. Yet if we can connect Americans in a meaningful way, and if you put great minds together in solving that problem, we could do it. But we just don't even think about it.
So I have to ask, what opinion do you have of these new wave of drugs, the Ozempic and the rest of it?
Well, I understand they're useful for people for the short run, but it's not a long-term answer. First of all, the efficacy seems to fall off after about a year or so, and if you quit taking the drug, all the weight comes back. But it's also, you can achieve the same outcome by eating a whole food plant-based diet, which is almost impossible to do in America because we're awash in processed foods. 80% of the foods in our grocery store are processed or ultra-processed foods. We eat over 110 kilos of meat every year. That's a bathtub of dead animal. We eat 60 or so kilos of sugar a year. Why? Because that's what's in our food supply. Whereas if we took the money that we're spending on these Ozempic type drugs and invested in a food system that made eating the whole food plant-based more delicious. Let's just face it, at the end of the day, it's deliciousness that's going to get people eating like this. Just a kind of a side thing, about a year and a half ago, sorry about that, longevity expert dies on podcast. You get a ratings pop on that one. But I actually hired a small team of people, and I wanted to create whole food plant-based meals that were maniacally delicious. We spent a year and a half, a small team of persons led by Abby Coleman from Yale, spent her career doing this. And with maniacal focus, we came up with 8 meals. It's called Blue Zone Kitchens. Release them into the marketplace. They're frozen. They're under $7 a piece. They're now in 2,000 grocery stores. It is the #1 top-selling frozen plant-based food in the grocery store right now. Won People Magazine's top award. Why? Not because it's the healthy choice, not because it's going to save the environment, not because it helps solve the cruelty to animal issue, but because it was maniacally delicious.
Wow.
And people buy it.
Okay. Look out for it in the store. Stress management. What have you learned from your travels on how you can manage stress? In Costa Rica, they were napping, and if you had an extra couple of hours, you'd spend it with your family rather than doing more work.
Yes, they fall into two categories. The category you have to remember, which is meditation or journaling or savoring experiences. And I'm not a big fan of those. Do they work? Yes. The problem is they have a half-life of about 3 weeks. You resolve, I'm going to do these things, and 6 months later, you're no longer doing them. There are more systematic things. Well, first of all, taking a nap is easy because people kind of get tired in the middle of the day, and it's allowing yourself to do what your body wants to do anyway. It's a lot easier to do. People who take a 20-minute nap 5 days a week have about a 30% lower rate of cardiovascular mortality. So that's a really easy thing to do. But once again, I turn to the environment. If you live in a kind of a soulless American suburb on a cul-de-sac where every time you want to go somewhere, you have to get in your car and you close the door in your own little cocooned environment, and you drive by, maybe you see a neighbor out watering the lawn or something, and you drive to a shopping mall and go into a garage, and it's just very hard to connect on a human level. On the other hand, if you live in a city like Boulder, Colorado, or Santa Barbara, California, or where I live in Miami Beach, every time I walk out my door, I bump into people. It's very easy to walk to I walk to a Starbucks every morning, and I see the same guy with his 2 dogs every day. I see him day 1, I don't say anything. Day 2, I might nod to him. Day 3, I say hi to him. Day 4, I'm talking to him. One of the best ways to relieve stress is have a conversation with a neighbor.
Yeah.
Now, humans are wonderful. Other humans are wonderful stress relievers for the most part. The casual, serendipitous encounters we have with other humans and conversations we have with other humans. And that's almost wholly a function of the environment we live in.
I've got to share when we met in 2018, and there was lots of people around. It was at Milken, but we spoke for a couple of minutes. And at the time, I had a load of stressful stuff going on at work. I had 3 gorgeous but quite young kids, so it was pretty busy. But I was doing some endurance sport, and the coaches were pushing me to do an Ironman, and said, "Listen, you got to do all this training every week." So I asked you, because we're in that sort of elite performance, all these high-achieving folk around Milken. Is it the good thing to do to go and spend more time, because it's a stress reliever, etc., with the expectation that you'd be like, yeah, go for it. That's the sort of stuff that you need to do. What do you think you advise me to do?
Probably to spend more time with your kids and not do the Ironman.
That's exactly what you said. You said, what are you doing? At our age, you got too much inflammation, all the rest of it. Go and spend time with your family. That's much more rewarding, which is what I did.
Yay!
So thank you for that. Life-changing. It seems quite sort of sensible in retrospect, but at the time it was great to have that conversation with you. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for doing it on behalf of your children, and thank you for bringing it up. The whole sort of, the paradigm of health and wellness back in the 80s and 90s was triathlons and marathons and carbo load, by the way. Remember those days? But after about age 30, I argue that these endurance sports are net negative. First of all, people who are chronically doing marathons and triathlons, they tend to have more calcium in their arteries, which portends a higher cardiovascular disease. They're more prone to injury. When you train hard and you wake up in the morning and your body is sore, that's inflammation. At the base of every age-related disease, whether it's Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, brain shrinkage, type 2 diabetes, is inflammation. And people aren't connecting the dots. That this overtraining your body is putting it in a chronic state of inflammation, which is contributing to those same diseases. You're much better off to do a brisk walk or play with your children for the long run. You're less likely to get injured. Your cardiovascular system is going to stay healthier. A brisk walk every day, which you can get walking back and forth to work, which again is why I'm a big fan of a walkable city, is worth about 4 extra years of healthy life expectancy. And there's no, I don't know of any research that shows that marathon running adds to your life expectancy at all.
So how do you stay well? Is it all the things in the blue zones? Do you manage to implement them all, or it's...
I implement most of them, although I do like a good tequila every now and again.
Yeah.
I eat a whole food plant-based diet. I very consciously live in a walkable neighborhood. Also on the beach, so I swim in the ocean. I hugely prioritize friends. I'm a good friend to a lot of people, and they in turn are good friends to me, and I think that's one of the best investments. And I'm suffused. I have this strong sense of purpose, which I live, and so it's very easy for me to figure out what I'm going to do for the day. And when I get in a stressful situation, or I get in a situation of indecision, my purpose serves as kind of ballast. It makes those decisions really easy.
But you must have a lot of calls in your time with the business, with the books, with all of it. How do you stop yourself from like getting pulled around too much and chasing? And
I still have to work on that one.
Okay, yeah,
I don't chase it. I just have a problem with saying yes.
yeah.
I say yes all the time.
Yeah.
I probably do a little bit too much, but my body will let me know when I can't do that anymore.
Well, we're here today because of a good friend of yours, and you said yes.
Patty.
Because of Patty McKillen, and you said yes, I'll definitely do it. So, last question that we always ask is, if you had advice to young Dan, what would it be?
Young Dan?
Yeah, yourself when you were younger.
I had a lot of doubt in doing what I was doing, because everybody else was doing useful and productive things, and I was off riding my bicycle or chasing these quixotic mysteries. It would be do what you're doing. You made the right call.
Because that framing of useful and productive, what you were doing was ultimately super useful and productive, right?
Ultimately. Now, it didn't start out that way. It started out as quixotic.
Yeah.
To say people are, I spent 8 years biking across 5 continents. My friends would say, when are you going to get a job? Or, yes, I'm going to harness the intuitive power of the internet to solve mysteries.
Yeah.
Well, the internet there wasn't even a World Wide Web when I started that. And
So the advice would be just don't doubt what you're doing. Is that...
Well, to the young Dan, it's not universal advice,
Yeah.
but it turns out it was the right path for me. I've been, enormously successful financially, and I feel like I make an impact, and I enjoy what I'm doing. And had I done the sensible thing at the time, which was, I got into law school and I was supposed to be a lawyer, I doubt very much my life would have been as satisfying as it is.
Thank you for the huge impact that you've made on the world and for all you do. And thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for sharing your audience with me and your time, and thank you for your fellowship. We'll see you when you're 100.
See you then. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, you might also listen to our episode with the founder of the fast food chain Leon, or the Happy Pair brothers, for more things health, well-being, and happiness. Tune in for our next guest, investigative journalist Annie Jacobson, who lets us in on the world's national security secrets. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X to keep up to date.
All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.